My son said, "Don't worry, we'll handle your meds." This morning, I opened my pillbox and found death neatly sorted by days of the week. Tuesday's compartment held two white ovals instead of one. The beta blocker I take at breakfast, nestled beside its twin like a pair of teeth. I didn't gasp. I didn't faint. I stood at my kitchen counter in my robe, the kettle just beginning to whisper on the stove, and felt something old and steel inside me lock into place. I am 74, not helpless, not confused. I line the pillbox on Sundays with the magnifier and the lamp angled low, one tab of the beta blocker, one of the ACE inhibitor, the tiny thyroid, the evening statin set aside in the night row. I count out loud. I write the totals on a yellow sticky. Met, 30 left. Leeson, 22. Levo, 14. Sunday I counted correctly. I remember because I always do. I clicked Tuesday open and set the twins on a saucer. The markings were the same, 50 milliliters stamped clean, the edges unchipped. Not a pharmacy error. My refills come blister packed, and the leftover bottle in the drawer was still sealed with its perforated ring intact. A second saucer for Wednesday. One tablet only, as it should be. Thursday, 2 again. Friday, 1. Saturday, 2. A pattern. Not clumsy, not random. The kettle went from whisper to low moan. I moved it off the burner and left it there. Tea could wait. I took my phone and photographed the saucers with the morning light sliding across them, then the open pillbox, then the sealed bottle with its lot number sharp as a confession. I printed the photos on my little wireless printer and slid the warm paper into a manila envelope labeled House Insurance. That made me smile. A small, precise smile I felt in my jaw more than my lips. "Don't worry, Mom," Daniel had said last week. Keys already in his hand, his coat still on. Claire behind him nodding as if she were the doctor, and I the child. "We'll handle your meds for a bit. Less for you to fuss over." He had touched my shoulder without looking at my eyes. When did people forget you can steer a person by their shoulder? When did they forget you shouldn't? I did not think about that longer than necessary. Thinking is a net. It catches fish and also your feet. I moved through the morning like a nurse on rounds. I found the notepad I keep by the phone and wrote, in block letters too big for misreading. Morning, 7:10 a.m. Tuesday box had 2 beta blockers, 50 mg each. Removed extras to saucer. Photos taken. I signed it. I dated it. People our age know. Paper with ink still matters. I made tea then, strong and plain. I sat and sipped and let my hands be still while my mind walked the kitchen. The drawer where the pillbox lives slides easily. The runner sticks a little near the end unless you lift with a thumb. The chair by the window creaks when you turn to reach the top shelf. The back door hinges squeal unless you push it all the way open. Every sound in this house has a name. I listened for the shape of whoever had been here, in the silence they'd left behind. I took out the trash log I keep for the city schedule and looked at the dates. Claire was here yesterday afternoon to drop off soup. She had set the container on the counter, lifted the lid to show me the steam, then insisted on putting it in the fridge herself. "You sit," she'd said, voice bright as lemon. I had sat. I had watched her move, tidy, arrange, adjust, like air traffic control, like ownership. I had thanked her because I am polite even when my neck prickles. I rinsed the saucers and dried them and slid the extra tablets into a small, clear snack bag I labeled with today's date. Then I did something that felt both petty and necessary. I took a long strip of transparent tape and laid it over the edges of each pillbox compartment, slicing it with the tip of a paring knife so that the flaps still opened, but would show if lifted by a hand less careful than mine. I wrote down that I had done it. I put the bagged tablets into the freezer, behind the peas. People who tamper with things do not look behind peas. At 9, I called the pharmacy. "Mrs. Winslow?" the pharmacist said, after the beep-bop of the hold music. "Yes, Margaret. Your dose is 150 milliliters each morning. Single tablet only." She paused. "Everything all right?" I could hear the carefulness, the training. "Yes," I said. "I'm confirming." She asked if I wanted an adherence pack delivered. I said no, thank you. I want the feeling of the tablet in my own palm. I want the sound of it clacking against china. There are small sovereignties we can still insist on. The clock over the stove thunked once as it settled into the half hour. A truck rumbled by, then silence again, thick as cloth. I washed my cup. I wiped the counter, slow, deliberate strokes that made the laminate shine. Then I opened the pillbox and took exactly what I was prescribed. 1. I held it on my tongue, tasted the chalk, and thought of how easily chalk can be doubled and called help. I did not call Daniel. I did not call Claire. The first call I made was to my doctor's office. I asked for a printout of my active medication list and the notes from my last visit. "For my records," I said. The second call I made was to a locksmith. "Front door, back door, garage," I told him. "Today, if you can." He could. "Bring 2 extra copies." The third call. I didn't place yet. I wrote the number on a fresh index card and laid it by the phone, face down. The way you lay down a card you know you'll have to turn. I dressed. Navy slacks, the soft sweater Lily gave me last Christmas, the one with the sleeves that don't ride up when you reach for the top shelf. I tied my hair back. I put my insurance card, my ID, and the photos into my handbag. I slipped the pillbox in too, tapes intact, lids closed, everything quiet as if nothing had ever happened here. By 10, I had my coat on and my keys in my hand. The house felt different, like a stage set after the audience has left and the lights are up, scuffs showing where the dancers turned. I locked the door, heard the new certainty in the tumblers, and stood on the porch a moment to let the winter air clear my head. I am not afraid, I told myself, and found that I believed it. On the sidewalk, a boy on a scooter skated past, his wheels rattling over the seam where my driveway meets the street. He waved like children do, with his whole arm. I waved back, and my hand felt steady, and my heart kept its honest rhythm under my sweater as I went to do what needed to be done. I straightened the folds of my navy blue dress, smoothing out invisible wrinkles. At 77, I no longer chased fashion, but I still liked to look neat, especially when my son invited me for dinner. He'd said there would be a special announcement. But instead of his voice greeting me at the door, my phone lit up with a message. "Mom, I'm sorry, we can't make it tonight. Marissa's hosting her co-workers instead. We'll reschedule." Before I could even put the phone down, another text came. "You weren't invited. My wife doesn't want you there." My own son, using his name, his number. I sank into my chair, clutching the phone as if letting go would make the truth vanish. All around me, the living room was filled with proof of years gone by. Photographs of golden anniversaries, fishing trips, graduations. I'd given Garrett everything I could, a down payment on their house, a new car, private school for his son. Every check I'd written had felt like the right thing to do. Now, those years seemed like a ledger of my own foolishness. I went to my desk and pulled the folder labeled Garrett. Inside, $20,000 for a failed business, course fees for Marissa, repairs for their roof, Toby's car insurance. 174 separate payments and transfers, each one a little piece of myself. I called the bank. My voice didn't shake. I want to suspend all automatic payments immediately and revoke my son's power of attorney. By the time the banker confirmed it, I felt lighter than I had in years. Garrett's calls buzzed and blinked across my screen, but I ignored them. Instead, I poured myself a cup of tea, sat in the quiet, and thought. For once, I had done something not for my son, not for his family, but for me. Under the pale morning light, my kitchen looked exactly the same as it had yesterday. Orderly, tidy, smelling faintly of chamomile tea. But I knew better. Something had shifted. I sat at the table with my glasses on, the manila envelope in front of me. Inside were the photographs I'd taken of the pillbox with its doubled doses, the sealed medication bottle, the snack bag in the freezer labeled with yesterday's date. Beside it was a second envelope, thinner, with a printout of my active medication list from the doctor. I ran my fingers over both like a gambler deciding which card to play first. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:17, my phone rang. "Morning, Mom." Daniel's voice was warm, falsely casual. "Claire and I were thinking. We'll come by later, bring lunch. You don't have to fuss with cooking." I could picture him, leaning against the kitchen counter at his house, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, already planning how to get into my drawers without me noticing. "That's thoughtful," I said evenly. "Come at noon. I'll make tea." When the line went dead, I opened my handbag and slipped in both envelopes. Then I took the small audio recorder from my desk drawer, tested it, and tucked it under the lace runner on the dining table. I'd bought it years ago to record my own recipes. Today, it had a different purpose. By noon sharp, Daniel was at the door with a white paper bag from the deli. Claire followed, smiling too brightly, a bouquet of cheap carnations in her hand. "Hi, Mom," she sang, brushing my cheek with a kiss that didn't land. "We thought you could use some company." I gestured them in, watching their eyes roam, not at me, but at the house. Daniel's gaze flicked to the pillbox on the counter. Claire's drifted to the drawers. Over lunch, they asked the usual questions. How was I sleeping? Did I feel dizzy lately? Had I been remembering to take all my pills? The recorder kept humming under the lace. "I manage fine," I said, sipping tea. "Though I do like to double-check things. You never know when people might make mistakes." Daniel shifted in his chair. Claire's smile stiffened. When they left, I waited until their car pulled away before retrieving the recorder. My own voice came first, soft, measured, then Daniel's and Claire's, asking, suggesting, hinting that maybe I should let them keep my medications at their house, just to be safe. I sat there for a long while, listening to the proof. Not rage, not fear, just a deep, steady knowing. They thought I wouldn't see. They thought I wouldn't act. They were wrong. That evening, I laid everything out on the dining table like evidence in a courtroom. The photographs, the bagged tablets, the recorder, the printout from my doctor. I didn't bother with dinner. Instead, I made a pot of strong black tea and sat by the window, watching the street lamps flicker on one by one. Across the road, the neighbors' grandchildren chased each other up and down the driveway, their laughter rising into the cool air. It had been a long time since laughter like that filled this house. I thought about the weeks after my hospital stay, the way Daniel had taken my pillbox from the counter without asking, telling me, "You just rest, Mom, I'll take care of it." The way Claire had stood behind him, nodding, as if my independence was a nuisance to be managed. At first, I'd wanted to believe they meant well. But the numbers in my head didn't lie. 150 milligram beta blocker per morning, no exceptions. A double dose wasn't care. It was either recklessness or intent. Around 8 p.m., I picked up the phone and dialed someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Margaret? The voice was slower now, older, but still had that firmness I remembered. Thomas Keene had been George's friend, since they'd both been junior associates at the law firm downtown. We'd exchanged Christmas cards for a while after George died, then drifted apart. I need some legal advice, I said, and I don't want to talk about it over the phone. By 8:30 the next morning, I was in his office. He still kept the same mahogany desk, though the wall behind it now displayed fishing photographs instead of degrees. He poured me coffee without asking. I want, I said, setting the envelope on his desk, to protect my home, my accounts, and my medical decisions from my son and his wife. Immediately. He didn't blink, just opened the envelope and began to read. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. This is more than enough to start. We'll revoke any medical or financial authority they have. We'll secure your property under your sole ownership, and he tapped the photographs. If this becomes criminal, you already have a trail. For the first time in days, I let out a slow breath. On the way home, I stopped at the locksmith's again. This time, I had him install a deadbolt on the inside of the back door. By noon, the locks were changed, the papers were in motion, and my will, updated and notarized, named only one family member as a beneficiary: my granddaughter Lily. The rest, out of reach. Daniel and Claire didn't know it yet, but their control over me had ended, and I intended to keep it that way. 2 days passed before Daniel called again. Mom, we've been thinking, why don't we come by on Sunday? We can go through some of your bills, make sure you're not overpaying for anything. I almost laughed. They were still trying. Still convinced I was the same woman who'd nod and agree, handing over papers without reading them. That's kind of you, I said. But I've already reviewed everything with Thomas Keene. You remember Thomas? Your father's old friend from the firm? There was a pause. Not long, but enough. Right. Yeah, I remember him. His voice had gone tight, like a man holding back words he didn't dare speak. Claire must have been near the phone because I heard her whisper, sharp, quick, before Daniel cleared his throat. Well, we just don't want you stressing over all that. I'm not, I said, my tone even. I'm perfectly fine. When Sunday came, I was ready. The recorder was in its usual place under the lace runner. The pillbox was taped again, each compartment exactly as prescribed. And I'd placed a small motion-activated camera on the hutch, its black eye blending into the shadow of the teapot collection. Daniel arrived carrying a bakery box, Claire with another bunch of supermarket carnations. We sat in the kitchen, sipping tea, while they circled toward the subject I knew was coming. Mom, Daniel said finally, you know this house is getting harder to maintain. Maybe it's time to think about... No, I said before he could finish. He blinked. I didn't even say what. You were going to suggest I transfer the deed to you, or sell it and move somewhere safer. My answer is no. Silence. Claire's smile collapsed. Daniel's jaw tightened. They didn't stay long after that. But once they were gone, I checked the camera. And there it was. Claire, waiting until I went to the bathroom, opening the pillbox, swapping one tablet for two. Daniel standing nearby, looking toward the hallway. It was all the confirmation I needed. I copied the video onto a flash drive and slid it into the manila envelope. The next call I would make wouldn't be to my lawyer. It would be to the police. I waited until morning to make the call. Not out of hesitation. No, my mind was settled. But because I wanted to be sharp, steady, and clear when I spoke. At 8:03 a.m., I dialed the non-emergency police number. My voice didn't waver. "This is Margaret Winslow. I believe my medication is being tampered with by family members. I have video, photographs, and physical evidence." The dispatcher's tone changed instantly. "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger right now?" "No, but I'd like an officer to come by today. Quietly, please." 2 hours later, there was a knock at my door. A tall officer with kind eyes introduced himself as Sergeant Holloway. He stepped inside, glanced once around my living room, and sat across from me at the dining table. I laid out everything: the photographs, the bagged pills, the medical printout, the audio recording, and finally, the video. When the footage played, he leaned forward, watching Claire's hands carefully remove the lid of my Tuesday compartment, slip in a second beta blocker, then close it with a casual flick. Daniel's shape hovered in the background, glancing toward the hall. "This," Holloway said when it ended, "isn't just suspicious, it's criminal." He asked if I wanted to press charges. I told him I did. But I also wanted something else, something quieter, more enduring: restraining orders, full documentation, a record that couldn't be erased or argued away. Before he left, he assured me the pills would be sent for analysis, the video and photos logged as evidence, and he gave me a card with his direct number. "If they come to your door unexpectedly, you call me, no matter the hour." After he was gone, I stood at the window, watching his patrol car disappear down the street. For the first time in months, I felt the house was mine again. Not just the bricks and mortar, but the air inside, the rooms, the quiet. Daniel and Claire would learn soon enough that I wasn't the woman they thought I was. And when they did, it wouldn't be a private family matter. It would be on the record. By Thursday, the weight of my decision had settled into a kind of calm. I'd half expected to feel rattled. After all, calling the police on your own son is not something most mothers ever imagine doing. But instead, there was a steadiness in me, like closing a door and knowing it would never open again. That morning, I took my time making tea, slicing a piece of the rye bread I'd baked the day before. I moved around my kitchen without the usual undercurrent of vigilance. No more glancing at the pillbox every few minutes. No more catching myself listening for footsteps behind me. At 10:14, my phone rang. Daniel. I let it buzz twice before answering. "Hello? Mom?" His tone was carefully casual, but there was a tightness underneath. "We've been trying to reach you. Claire's worried. She says you've been acting different." "I've been busy," I said. "With what?" "Paperwork, appointments, you know, the usual." There was a pause. I could hear the faint murmur of Claire's voice in the background, then Daniel again. "We want to come by later, just to check in." I almost smiled. "No, thank you." "Mom?" I said no. The silence on the line was heavy, his next words lower, almost sharp. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Harder for who?" I asked, my voice level. Before he could answer, I hung up. I sat there for a moment, holding the phone, letting the quiet of the room wrap around me. At 2:30, Sergeant Holloway called. The lab had confirmed the extra pills were identical in dosage and type to my prescription. But doubling that dose could have caused my blood pressure to drop dangerously low. It was, in his words, a clear and deliberate act that could have resulted in serious harm or death. They'd be moving forward with questioning Daniel and Claire. When I ended the call, I walked to the front door and looked out over the street. It was bright for February, the kind of day when light catches on every small thing. The frost melting off car roofs, the glitter of broken glass from a bottle someone had dropped near the curb. At 4 o'clock, a different knock came. Slower, harder. I knew before I opened it who it would be. Daniel stood there, his shoulders tight, his eyes too bright. Claire was behind him, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. "We need to talk," he said. "No," I answered. "You need to leave." "Mom, don't do this." His voice was low, urgent. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, keeping my hand on the doorknob. "And so do the police." The shift in his face was quick. First shock, then something colder. Claire stepped forward, her voice cutting in. "You'd go to strangers instead of talking to your own family? After everything we've done for you?" I thought of the video, the photographs, the pills in my freezer. I thought of my husband's handwriting on the old deed to this house, the weight of the keys in my pocket. "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly what I'd do." I closed the door before they could answer. Their voices rose on the other side, muffled, then faded as footsteps retreated down the path. I stood there, palm resting on the cool wood, breathing slowly. There was a time when I would have opened that door again, called after them, tried to fix what was broken, but that time was gone. In the kitchen, the pillbox sat in its place, untouched. I made another cup of tea, the steam curling upward in the quiet, and thought, not for the first time, how peace isn't always soft. Sometimes peace is a lock turning. Sometimes it's the sound of your own door closing. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, the room still dim with the gray light that comes before dawn. I lay there a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the radiator, feeling the weight of the blanket, and realized something I hadn't felt in years. My body was at ease. After breakfast, I sat at the dining table with my notebook. I began listing the things that still needed doing. Contact the utility companies to ensure accounts were in my name only. Notify my doctor's office that Daniel and Claire were no longer authorized for any medical information. Arrange for a safety deposit box at the bank for important documents and the evidence I'd gathered. By 9 o'clock, I was downtown, walking into the bank with my handbag tucked close. The teller recognized me and waved me toward a side office. Inside, I met with Mrs. Keating, the branch manager, who helped me secure the box. We placed the photographs, video copies, and pill samples inside, along with my will and the updated deed to the house. The lock clicked shut with a sound that felt final. On my way home, I stopped at the market. The cashier, a boy barely old enough to shave, greeted me with a cheerful, "Good morning, Mrs. Winslow." I found myself smiling back. Really smiling, not the polite mask I'd worn for so long. At home, I brewed tea and settled into the armchair by the window. The street outside was quiet except for the mailman making his rounds. When he reached my door, he slipped an envelope through the slot. With handwriting I recognized immediately. Claire's. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short, looping message. "We can make this right. Just talk to us." I set it aside without answering. I had already spoken in the clearest language possible. Legal documents, police reports, locks changed. Words were easy. Action was harder. That evening, as the sun slid low, Sergeant Holloway called again. Daniel and Claire had been interviewed. They'd denied everything, of course, but the evidence was solid. There would be a formal investigation, and I would be kept informed every step of the way. After we hung up, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing my teacup. The window over the sink reflected my face in the fading light, older, lined, but steady. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood, and I intended to stay there. On Sunday morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. I baked. The smell of cinnamon and apples filled the kitchen, the oven humming warmly as the light rain tapped against the window. I wasn't baking for anyone in particular, just myself. That was the point. While the pie cooled, I sat at the table with the small black camera in my hands. The footage from that day was already copied and locked away in the bank, but I still kept the original card here, hidden in a plain envelope marked tax receipts. Old habits die hard. At 11:06, the doorbell rang. I knew that rhythm. 2 short presses, a pause, then one longer one. Daniel. I didn't move. I let him press it again, harder this time, before his voice came through the wood. "Mom, it's me. I just want to talk." I took my time walking to the door. I didn't open it. "I told you, Daniel, there's nothing left to discuss. You've blown this out of proportion. We were just trying to help." I cut him off. Help doesn't involve doubling someone's heart medication. Help doesn't require changing the locks. Silence for a beat, then Claire's sharper tone. "We know you've been to the police. That's unnecessary. This can be handled privately." "That's not how it works anymore," I said. I heard Daniel sigh, low and heavy. "You're making a mistake. People are going to start asking questions. Do you really want the whole family to know about this?" I almost laughed. There it was, the soft threat wrapped in concern. "Yes," I said. "I do." After a moment, their footsteps retreated. Through the lace curtain, I watched them walk down the path, heads close together against the drizzle, their pace quick. By early afternoon, I was in my living room sorting through the small safe I kept under the stairs. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years: George's pocket watch, a faded bundle of letters, Lily's kindergarten drawing of me holding her hand. I added a fresh stack of documents, copies of the police report, the lab analysis of the pills, and a list of every conversation I'd had with Daniel and Claire since this began. At 3:45, the phone rang. It was Lily. "Grandma, Dad says you're mad at him. Did he do something wrong?" I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. "Lily, your father and I just have some things to work out. Nothing for you to worry about. How's school?" She launched into a story about her science project, her voice bright and unguarded. I let her talk, making small sounds of encouragement, committing every detail to memory. She was the one part of this family I'd protect without question, but not by staying silent. That night, I wrote a letter to her. Not for now, she was too young, but for when she was old enough to understand. I explained what had happened, why I'd acted as I did, and the lesson I hoped she'd take from it: that kindness never requires you to endanger yourself, and that boundaries are not unloving. I sealed it in an envelope, dated it, and placed it in the safe with the rest. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the street glistening under the lamplight. My reflection in the darkened window looked almost unfamiliar. Not because I seemed older, but because I seemed certain. Daniel and Claire might still try to press, to cajole, to find a way back into the control they'd once had. But the locks were changed, the evidence secure, the law on my side. And for the first time in a long time, I was no longer playing defense. I was standing my ground. Monday morning broke cold and bright, the kind of winter day where the sun tricks you into thinking it's warmer than it is. I wrapped myself in my wool coat and set out early, carrying a small tote bag with the weight of purpose inside it. The police station was quieter than I expected. A young officer at the front desk recognized my name and waved me through to an interview room. Sergeant Holloway was already there, a stack of papers and a laptop open in front of him. "Mrs. Winslow," he said warmly, standing to pull out a chair. "Thank you for coming in. I wanted to go over the next steps." I set the tote bag on the table and began unpacking. My latest set of photographs, a fresh copy of the camera footage, and a printed timeline I'd been updating daily. "You're thorough," he said, looking genuinely impressed. "I've had to be," I replied. "People assume older women don't notice things, or that we can't keep track. They're wrong on both counts." He smiled faintly, then grew serious. "We'll be issuing formal notices to your son and daughter-in-law this week. They'll be told not to contact you, not to come to your home, and not to interfere with your medical care. If they violate any of that, you call me immediately." I nodded. "And the criminal side?" "Still in motion. The lab results were strong, but we're also reviewing the recordings with the prosecutor. It's not a quick process, but the evidence is solid." When we were finished, he walked me to the door. "You're doing the right thing," he said quietly. "Not everyone in your position has the courage to see it through." Outside, the air was sharp in my lungs, but it felt clean. I stopped at the bakery on my way home, buying a single roll and a small jar of jam. Small indulgences for me alone. Back at the house, I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table with the roll still warm in my hands. I thought about what Holloway had said, about courage. I didn't feel brave. I felt awake. At 2:12, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Winslow, this is Elaine from Elder Protective Services. We've been informed about your case and wanted to offer support, home safety checks, legal guidance, that sort of thing." I agreed to meet her later in the week. It struck me that I'd spent years telling myself I didn't need help, not realizing that accepting help from the right places was entirely different from letting someone take over your life. In the late afternoon, I checked the mailbox. Inside was a single envelope with no return address, just my name in Daniel's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I placed it on the counter, made another pot of tea, and let it sit there while the daylight drained from the room. When I finally slid it open, there were only 5 words on the page. "You're going to regret this." I stared at it for a long moment, then reached for my phone. I photographed the letter, printed the image, and added both the paper and the printout to my evidence folder. By the time I locked the folder away, night had fallen. The house was still, the only sound the faint tick of the wall clock. I stood by the front door, checked the deadbolt, and felt the solid click beneath my hand. Regret was the last thing I felt. What I felt was resolve, settled deep, steady as stone. Thursday morning brought with it the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. I sat at the dining table, the steam from my tea rising in slow curls, when the doorbell rang. 3 short presses, quick and impatient. I didn't move right away. I listened. Footsteps shifted outside. A muffled voice, Claire's. "She's home. I saw her car." I rose, deliberately slow, and went to the door without unlocking it. "Yes? Mom, it's me?" Daniel's voice came, lower than usual, almost coaxing. "We just want to talk." "I told you not to come here," I said evenly. "The police made that clear." Claire cut in. "We're family. We don't need the police between us." "That's exactly what we need," I replied, my hand still on the lock. Daniel's voice sharpened. "You can't just shut us out. This is our family home. Eventually, it's going to be ours." The words hung there, hot in the cold morning air. I let them sit for a moment before answering. "Not anymore." A rustle of movement. Then Claire's voice again, thinner now. "You'll regret making enemies of your own blood." I almost laughed. "You made that choice, not me." I stepped back from the door, refusing to say another word. They stood there a moment longer, muttering to each other. Then I heard the crunch of their footsteps on the frosted path. I didn't watch them leave. After they were gone, I called Sergeant Holloway. "They were here," I said simply. "I'll file the violation," he replied. "If they show up again, we can move for immediate enforcement. Keep your camera ready." I spent the rest of the morning going through drawers and cabinets, checking for anything I might have overlooked. Documents, spare keys, old bank statements. In the back of a kitchen drawer, I found a single brass key wrapped in paper. George's handwriting, garage. I walked out to the detached garage, the cold air biting at my face. Inside, under a dusty tarp, was the oak trunk George and I had brought back from our honeymoon in Maine. It was heavy, but I managed to drag it into the light. The lock still worked. Inside were keepsakes. George's service medals, Lily's baby clothes, photographs yellowed with age. Beneath those, a slim folder I didn't remember seeing before. When I opened it, I found copies of our original deed, old insurance policies, and a letter George had written but never given me. In it, he'd written, "If anything happens to me, make sure you keep the house in your name. Don't let anyone talk you out of it, not even family, especially not family." I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. George had known, even then. Back inside, I added the letter to my safe, right on top of the evidence folder. That night, I lit the fire in the hearth for the first time in months. The crackle of the wood filled the room as I sat with my tea, George's words echoing in my mind. They would try again. Of that, I had no doubt. But now I had his voice, steady and certain, alongside my own, and I would not be moved. Saturday began with a brittle, cloudless cold that made every sound outside ring sharper. I was finishing my second cup of tea when the phone rang, Sergeant Holloway's number. "Mrs. Winslow," he began, "the prosecutor's office has reviewed everything. They're authorizing a formal criminal case. There will be charges for both Daniel and Claire, tampering with medication, reckless endangerment, and violation of protective orders." I let the words settle. "So it's official," I said. "It is. We'll be serving them this afternoon. If they try to contact you after that, call me right away." After we hung up, I sat at the table with my hands around the warm mug. For months, I'd been in a state of quiet readiness, waiting for the next intrusion, the next subtle theft of control. Now, the direction had shifted. The law would speak for me. By noon, a police cruiser was parked 2 houses down. Discreet, Holloway had promised. I went about my day, laundry, dusting the shelves, putting away groceries. But every so often I'd glance out the window and see that dark blue car still there. Watching. At 3:17, the sound of tires on gravel. Daniel's SUV. I moved to the window but stayed out of sight. He and Claire stepped out, their faces tight, scanning the street. They didn't make it to my path before 2 officers approached them from the curb. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the papers handed over, saw Daniel's jaw set like stone, Claire's arms crossed tightly over her chest. For a moment, I thought Daniel might look toward my window. He didn't. They turned, got back into the SUV, and drove away without so much as a glance at the house. Only when the cruiser pulled away half an hour later did I realize I'd been holding my breath. That evening, I sorted through the safe again. I added the day's date to my written log and noted, charges filed, protective order served. The discipline of keeping records had become more than a habit. It was a shield. After dinner, I called Lily. Her voice was a balm, light and warm, telling me about her school play and the role she'd been cast in. We didn't talk about her father. We didn't need to. There are conversations you postpone not out of fear, but out of love for the listener's peace. When the call ended, I stood for a long time at the front door, looking out over the street under the yellow wash of the lamplight. Somewhere out there, Daniel and Claire were stewing in whatever story they'd chosen to tell themselves about me. I didn't care to know the details. What mattered was this. The front door was locked. The house was warm. My medicine sat on the counter, untouched except by my own hands. Before bed, I wrote a short note to myself on a scrap of paper and pinned it to the corkboard in the kitchen. Your life is yours. Keep it that way. It wasn't for inspiration. It was a reminder, a statement of fact. And as I turned out the lights and walked through the quiet rooms, I realized that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't bracing for anything. I was simply living. The following Tuesday began like any other. Tea, the rustle of the newspaper, the quiet hum of the radiator. But by mid-morning, the air in the house shifted. It was the knock. Slow, deliberate, and far too familiar. I rose, my slippers soundless on the hardwood, and peered through the side curtain. 2 plainclothes officers stood on the porch, their jackets marked only by the small shields clipped to their belts. Between them, Daniel and Claire. I opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. "Mrs. Winslow," one officer said politely, "we're here to collect a few additional items for evidence. Mr. and Mrs. Porter will remain outside." I unlatched the chain and stepped back. Daniel's eyes flicked past me into the house, but I didn't meet them. Claire looked away altogether, her lips pressed thin. The officers moved efficiently, photographing the pillbox on the counter, the freezer with its small bag of dated tablets, the tape on each compartment lid. I handed them the latest log entries and the printouts from my doctor's office. While they worked, I stood at the kitchen sink, my hands loosely folded, listening to the muffled conversation outside. Daniel's voice was low, clipped. Claire's had that sharp edge I'd heard so many times when she thought she was losing control. When the officers finished, they thanked me and left. I stayed at the window long enough to see Daniel glance back once, not at me, but at the house itself, before getting into the car. The rest of the day passed quietly. I made soup, read a few chapters of an old mystery novel, and wrote in my journal. But that evening, as I was locking the front door, I saw something pale tucked into the side of the storm door frame, a folded piece of lined paper, no envelope. I carried it to the table, unfolded it, and read, "You've turned everyone against us. Hope you're happy." The handwriting was Claire's. I didn't feel anger. What I felt was a deep, almost physical weariness, not for myself, but for the smallness of the world they'd chosen to live in. A world where care was a tool, where control masqueraded as love. I photographed the note, slipped it into a plastic sleeve, and logged it with the date and time. It joined the rest of the evidence in the safe. Later, over tea, I thought about what everyone meant to her. Maybe the neighbors who'd stopped waving at them. Maybe the relatives who'd begun calling me instead of them. Or maybe it was just the two of them, realizing that for once, the story wasn't entirely theirs to tell. Before bed, I stood in the doorway of the spare room that Lily sometimes used when she stayed over. The quilt was folded neatly at the foot of the bed, the small lamp waiting to be switched on. It gave me a quiet sort of comfort, knowing the space was ready, just in case she ever needed it. When I turned out the light, I passed the corkboard in the kitchen. My note from the other night still hung there. Your life is yours. Keep it that way. I touched it with my fingertips before heading to bed, the words steadying me like the railing on a staircase. Whatever Daniel and Claire thought they'd lost, I knew exactly what I had gained, and I intended to keep it. Friday arrived with a thin frost coating the lawn, sparkling under a weak sun. I moved slowly through the morning, letting myself enjoy the simple rhythm. Tea, toast, the soft creak of the old floorboards as I crossed from room to room. Around 11, the phone rang. It was Elaine from Elder Protective Services. Mrs. Winslow, I wanted to let you know your protective order has been extended for a full year, she said. And the prosecutor will be seeking a no-contact provision as part of the criminal case. Good, I replied. That should make things clear. Also, she added, if you'd like, we can arrange a safety inspection of your home, just to make sure everything's secure. I hesitated only a moment. Yes, I'd like that. By mid-afternoon, 2 representatives were at my door. They walked through each room, checking locks, windows, and entry points. They suggested a few upgrades, longer screws in the strike plates, a motion light near the back gate. Small changes, but effective. While they worked, I thought about the difference between this kind of help and the help Daniel and Claire had offered. Theirs had always come with strings, unspoken, but tight. This was different. No judgment. No intrusion. Just the kind of help that leaves you more in control, not less. When they left, I stood for a moment in the quiet, the new light at the back already set to flick on at dusk. I felt safer. Not just because of the locks or the paperwork, but because I had built these layers of safety myself, one deliberate step at a time. At 4:12, there was a knock on the door. Firm, steady, not theirs. Through the peephole, I saw Sergeant Holloway. Evening, Mrs. Winslow, he said when I opened it. Just wanted to let you know, Daniel and Claire have been officially arraigned. They entered not guilty pleas. Trial date's been set for 3 months from now. I nodded. Thank you for telling me in person. He gave a small smile. Also, thought you might want this. From his folder, he pulled a printed still from my kitchen camera, the one that had caught Claire doubling the pills. It was clear as day. Her hand over the open compartment, the second tablet between her fingers, Daniel's shadow in the frame. I took it carefully. I'll keep it, I said. After he left, I sat at the dining table with the photograph. I didn't feel vindicated exactly. It was something quieter than that. Confirmation, perhaps. Proof not just for the court, but for myself, that I hadn't imagined it, hadn't overreacted. The photograph went into the safe with the rest. That night, I built a small fire in the hearth and let the room fill with its warmth. I made a pot of tea and brought out a slice of the apple pie I'd baked earlier in the week. The flames shifted and cracked softly, the shadows dancing against the walls. I thought about the months before all this began, how I'd let my world shrink without noticing, how I'd begun to measure my independence in teaspoons and pill compartments. And I thought about the choice I'd made that morning with the extra tablet in my hand. To act, not to hope things would resolve themselves. It had been the right choice. By the time I washed my cup and turned out the lights, the frost had returned outside, silvering the lawn under the moonlight. I paused at the back door, watching the new motion light flick on when a stray cat darted across the yard. A year ago, that sudden flare might have startled me. Tonight, it made me feel steady. I locked the door, pocketed the keys, and walked upstairs knowing that whatever came next, I would meet it on my own terms. And that, more than anything else, was what safety truly meant. The morning of the court hearing arrived gray and damp, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones if you let it. I rose early, not because I had to be there. My lawyer assured me my presence wasn't required for this preliminary stage, but because I wanted to be awake when the day's first decisions were made. I brewed tea, the steam curling in the dim kitchen, and set out my notebook. It had grown thick over the past months, pages filled with neat, dated entries. Every visit, every call, every note slipped through my door. At the very front, underlined twice, was the first entry. Tuesday box had 2 beta blockers, 50 millis each. That was where it had all begun. At 9:14, Thomas Keene called from outside the courthouse. "It's over for today. Arraignment confirmed, protective orders reinforced." The judge was clear. "Any violation will result in immediate arrest." "And the trial date?" "Still set. We're ready." I thanked him and hung up. The quiet in the kitchen felt different now, less like a pause between storms, more like the first stillness after one. Around noon, I walked to the market for bread and milk. Several neighbors nodded or waved. One woman I barely knew stopped me at the corner. "You're a strong one, Margaret," she said, patting my arm. "Takes a lot to stand up like that." I smiled politely, but inside I thought, it's not strength, not really. It's simply refusing to hand your life to people who don't mean you well. Back home, I made a sandwich and ate it at the dining table, looking out over the yard. The new motion light glinted faintly on its metal bracket. The frost on the lawn was already melting. In the afternoon, Lily called. Her voice was bright with news about school and the play she'd been rehearsing for. "You should come see it, Grandma," she said. "I wouldn't miss it," I told her. We talked for a while about her lines, her costume, the nervous excitement in her voice reminding me of the way she used to chatter as a little girl. When the call ended, I sat for a moment in the stillness, holding the phone as if her warmth might linger there. Later, I opened the safe one last time for the day. The photograph of Claire with the pill in her fingers lay on top, next to George's letter. I read his words again. "Don't let anyone talk you out of it, especially not family," and felt the same steady certainty I'd carried since that morning in the kitchen when the kettle first began to whisper. As dusk fell, I pinned a new note to the corkboard in the kitchen, just below the first. "You acted. You endured. You won't forget." The first was a reminder. The second, a record. When night came, I moved through the house, locking each door, checking each window. The small rituals of safety no longer felt like fear. They felt like ownership. I poured one last cup of tea, the kind George used to drink in the evenings, and sat by the fire. Outside, the frost was forming again, silver under the lamplight. Inside, the house was warm, the air still, the keys heavy in my pocket. I thought of the months behind me, the slow narrowing of my world, the moment I noticed, the choice to resist, and the steady climb back into the full possession of my own life. If there was a lesson in it, it was this. Help is not control. Silence is not peace. And love is not proven by what you're willing to lose for it. Some things you hold on to, no matter who tries to take them. The fire crackled softly, the tea cooling in my hands. I didn't need to look at the locked doors to know they were there, and I didn't need anyone else's permission to feel safe in my own home.